To everyone, and for some of you, probably good morning. Sorry for the delay. I have had some technical problem, and I think that we can start. Today we have Stefano Manfredonia from the Fordham University that will present a paper about minimum effect of minimum wage policies on corporate policy. The title is "Now You See It, Now You Don't: Financial Constraint, Minimum Wage Policy and Employment." A few words to introduce Stefano, that is assistant professor at the Fordham University in New York, that has completed a PhD in Tor Vergata, at University of Tor Vergata in Rome, and during his studies has been a visitor student scholar at the Institute for Economic and Finance and the International Fund of Agricultural Development. I think that you can start. Please, Stefano, the floor is yours. You have to switch on your microphone. Stefano, you have to switch on your microphone.
Yeah, okay. Can you see my screen now? Can you see the screen, Lucio?
Yes, we can.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the nice introduction. And I'm really happy to present my paper. And I'm really happy to get to know new researchers. So the paper that I'm going to present today is this one. Now you see it, now you don't. Financial constraints, minimum wage policies, and employment. It is a paper in which I'm working with Alona. She was our PhD student here at Fordham University, and now she's an assistant professor at the University of North Florida. And Iftekhar Hasan and Ron Massoulis, that are two established finance scholars. So basically what we show in this paper is that corporate financial constraints play a crucial role in explaining the relationship between minimum wage policies and employment. So let me start this talking about the motivation behind our research question. As you probably know, in the past few years, there has been a huge increase in the adoption of minimum wage policies across US states. Many different states increase their minimum wage, but not only at the state level, also there is an ongoing discussion at the national level to increase the federal minimum wage from $9 per hour to $15 per hour. That is actually a huge increase, and many states will be affected by this federal minimum wage increase. So, considering the widely adoption of these minimum wage policies in the US, these policies are now at the center of policy debates. And in particular, at the center of these policy debates, there is an old but really important question. What is the impact of minimum wage policies on employment? Indeed, if it is possible to show that minimum wage policies decrease employment, well, it means that these widely used policies are quite useless to help low-wage workers. So considering the importance of this question, there has been a huge literature in economics that try to investigate to answer to this question. But despite 100 years of research, it is still not clear whether minimum wage actually affects employment. There are some papers that find a negative effect of minimum wage policies on employment. Most of the papers find no effect of minimum wage policies on employment, and there are even some papers that document positive effects. But the general accepted conclusion is that minimum wage policies do not affect employment. So what is surprising in that within this huge literature in economics, there are really few papers that look at the role that corporations play in this setting. And it is quite surprising because corporations are really heterogeneous in their resources and financial resources, and also are the main entities that decide whether to retain or fire employees. And therefore, it is surprising that there are almost no papers that look at the characteristics of corporations in this setting, especially considering that recent research in finance shows that a specific corporate characteristics, that is corporate financial constraints, is able to explain aggregate employment dynamics. And in particular, here I'm referring to these two really nice papers by Giroux and Mueller that shows that financial constraints play a crucial role in explaining aggregate employment dynamics after demand shocks. So what we do in our paper is to answer the following research question. Do corporate financial constraints play a role in explaining the relationship between minimum wage policies and employment dynamics? Even if most of the previous literature in finance focus on the role of corporate financial constraints in explaining capital expenditures, there are several reasons to think that financial constraints play also a crucial role in this setting. Indeed, an increase in minimum wage directly increases labor cost. And therefore, it makes sense to think that if a corporation is financially constrained and it cannot access and it is not able to cover this additional cost using exclusively internal resources, they will have to fire employees. But even in a situation in which corporations have internal resources to cover these additional expenses, we know really well from the finance literature that financially constrained firms will put a higher value in preserving this liquidity. And therefore, to preserve the liquidity, they will be more likely to fire employees after an increase in the minimum wage. Several factors further exacerbate the situation, including the inability to use labor as collateral and the fixed component cost of employment that have been shown to present specific challenges to labor financing. So, in order to advance our research question, we create a unique database at both the establishment and firm level. And so the use of this database allow us to compare establishments that are located in different states and therefore are heterogeneously exposed to minimum wage policies, but belong to the same firm with a given level of financial constraints. So this is the database that we use. And we also adopt two different quasi-experimental settings. First, we use a more generic setting in which we combine the staggered introduction of minimum wage policies during this 30 years period, and we also combine it with a border discontinuity approach. So basically, we compare state establishments that are located at the border of a state, and we compare this establishment with another establishment on the other side of the border that is therefore exposed to a different minimum wage policies, even if the two areas are expected to be similar in terms of several observable and not observable characteristics. And also we use alternative measure of financial constraints at the firm level. For example, I don't know if you are familiar with this financial constraint matrix, but we will use the size of a firm as a proxy, but also the WWE index, the SA index, that are widely used in finance to measure corporate financial constraints. So that is the first laboratory experiment that we adopt. And in another exercise, we focus on the federal minimum wage increase during the financial crisis. And more importantly, this setting allows us to use an exogenous measure of financial constraints based on the ex-ante variation in long-term debt maturity. So basically, using this unique setting, we are able to establish a causal relationship between access to external resources and employment levels. So here you can see a summary of our main findings. So first of all, we find, using our first experimental setting, we find that minimum wage policies do not affect employment levels on average during normal economic times. And it is in line with many papers that find no effect on average of minimum wage policies on employment. However, what it is interesting is that we find that there is a large and negative effect for establishments that belong to financially constrained firms. So to better understand this result, we use our firm level database, and we show that exposure to minimum wage policies actually led to a decrease in corporate cash holdings. So it reduced corporate internal resources. And also we find that increased the use of short-term and long-term debt as well as trade credit. So it seems that this exposure to these minimum wage policies decrease corporate internal resources and push firms to go around and look for external resources to finance their activities. Next, we use our unique quasi-experimental settings, and we show that during the financial crisis, that is a period of extreme financial constraints, corporations on average decrease their employment level after the federal minimum wage increase. And especially we show that this effect is driven by constrained firms that we identify using our exogenous measure based on the debt maturity structure. And finally, we conclude the paper by using a counterfactual exercise that allow us to estimate a decrease in aggregate employment of almost 1.5% in the US, only due to financial constraints after a minimum wage increase. So basically, it seems that financial constraints really can explain these mixed findings in this huge economic literature that is unable to take into account corporate characteristics. And also they can have serious aggregate employment effects. So this is a summary, an overview of our paper. So by doing so, we contribute to different strands of the literature. For sure, we contribute to this huge literature in economics that try to understand whether minimum wage policies affect employment. We contribute to a growing literature in finance that try to understand how minimum wage affect corporate policies. And also we contribute to another large literature in finance that investigate the impact of financial constraints on corporate outcomes. And in particular, most of this literature focus on the impact on financial constraints on capital expenditures. So our results show that these policies could have a substantial negative effect on overall employment in the presence of financial constraints, which has important policy implications. Indeed, our results suggest that it's a terrible idea to adopt minimum wage policies in period of constraints. And by doing so, we kind of reconcile previous mixed evidence in this literature. So, to advance our research, let's talk a bit about the data that we used. We use minimum wage information from Bagul and Zipperer that made their minimum wage information available to everybody. They did a really nice job. We use establishment level information from the NETS database that contains information on all the establishments in the United States. And finally, we use information on corporate balance sheet characteristics from Compustat. Our final database is composed by more than 2 million establishment year observation, and it covers 30 years. So here you can see, let's start to talk about our first empirical setting that can be summarized by this picture. So on the left, you can see for every state, the minimum wage, the relative minimum wage policy. So you can see that, more or less all the states increase the minimum wage policies. You can see here California that increased recently the minimum wage rate until to $15 per hour. That actually is a big number. But overall, we can see that there is enough heterogeneity across time and across states that we can exploit in our empirical analysis. On the right, you can see basically the empirical strategy that we were going to adopt. Indeed, we are going to focus our analysis on establishments that are located on state borders. Therefore, we are going to compare, for example, a establishment that is located in these states and exposed to this state minimum wage policies, and we compare it with another establishment on the other states. And these two areas are expected to be similar in terms of several observable characteristics, but exposed heterogeneously to different minimum wage policies. So this is our equation that we are going to estimate. The outcome variable is the natural logarithm of the number of employees at establishment I at time t. Minimum wage is the effective minimum wage rate in a state S at times t minus 1. And we also include establishment and year fixed effect, but also firm times year fixed effects that basically allow us to compare establishments within the same firm, and is particularly strong specification. So here it is what we find. We find no average effect. We show the results for all the counties on the border, and counties on border, which centroid is less than 75 kilometers. Indeed, maybe something that I did not discuss. You can see the green areas are all the areas on state borders, but these light green areas are also counties on the state borders, but you can see that they are less likely to be similar to each other because they are much larger in size and irregular in their shape. While here, the comparison seems much more these counties are much are closer, and therefore, since they are geographically closer, they are more likely to be similar. So we report the results for 3 samples for all the counties, only for the counties on the border, and counties on the border which centroid is less than 75 kilometers, and is something that is widely used in the finance literature, in the labor economics literature. So we find no average effect of minimum wage policies on employment. Also, when we consider the dynamics effect, you can see that there is no effect at all. So it seems that minimum wage policies do not affect employment of the establishments. And also, the parallel trend assumption seems likely to hold. Indeed, none of the coefficients is statistically significant before the event. That is also important for our empirical analysis. Next, that is the center of our research question, we consider the role of corporate financial constraints. And in particular, we use these 3 alternative measures that are corporate size, the WW index, and the SA index. And in our robustness checks, we show that our results hold when we consider the Kaplan and Singales index, alternative composite financial constraint measures, and a textual analysis based on the 10K filings. So basically, our result holds whatever measure of financial constraints we can imagine. So this is an overview of our results. Here, we're interested in this interaction coefficient that suggests that larger firms, smaller firms are more likely to decrease their employment after a minimum wage change. And the same is true when we look at the WW index and say SA index. And in particular, this result suggests that one standard deviation change in this financial constraints variable decreased employment of 0.2% after a $1 increase in the minimum wage. So financial constraints seems to play a really important role, with financially constrained firms actually reducing their employment level. Now, we are working on a revision for a journal, and we basically show in a revised version of the paper that constrained firms actually reduce their employment level, but we also find that unconstrained firms actually increase their employment level. And it is really interesting because it seems that unconstrained firms actually benefit from the positive aspects of a minimum wage policy. For example, we show that why firms can benefit from an increase in the minimum wage. Well, we are showing in the revised version of the paper that basically unconstrained firms see a lower turnover rate, but we also observe that there is an increase in the labor supply that also benefit corporations. By the way, it seems overall that financial constrained firms, corporate financial constraints play a really crucial role in explaining employment dynamics after a change in the minimum wage. And these results are robust to different robustness checks, like the use of the new difference in difference estimators, alternative measure of financial constraints, when we focus only on sectors that are more heavily exposed to minimum wage policies, and so on. Yeah, I'm in a call, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So here we also have another set of additional results. In particular, we show that we still find negative effect of minimum wage policies on aggregate employment dynamics. And okay, so I think that we don't have a lot of time to focus on these results. In the second part of the paper, as I was saying, we try to understand why financially constrained firms, establishment that belongs to financially constrained firms, actually decrease their employment. And to do so, we create a measure at the corporate level of exposure to minimum wage policies. And in particular, is the share of employees of a company exposed to a specific minimum wage policies across all the 51 states. So, first of all, we find that exposure to minimum wage policies reduce employment of constrained firms also at the firm level. And it is interesting because it is possible that managers simply reallocate employees from establishments that are exposed to minimum wage policies to establishments that are not exposed. If it is the case, we will not find any effect at the firm level, but still we find effect at the overall firm level. So still reallocation of employees within the firm do not mitigate this corporate financial constraints problem. And second, we use this corporate level analysis to better understand how exposure to minimum wage policies actually affect corporations. Why do they need to reduce employment if they are financially constrained? And we find that exposure to minimum wage policies actually decrease cash. So it decreases corporate internal resources, increase leverage. So it seems that corporations that are exposed to these minimum wage policies will go and look for external resources to cover these additional expenses. They use both short and long-term debt, but also increase the use of trade credit. And finally, we find that they also reduce other expenditure, such as research and development and capital expenditure, without any effect on overall performance measured by the return on asset. So this result demonstrates that companies subject to minimum wage policies are forced to acquire resources to meet short-term liquidity needs, potentially leading financially constrained firms to reduce their workforce. So in the last part of the paper, we basically use the federal minimum wage increase during the Great Recession and compare employment dynamics of establishments located in bound versus unbound states to this change. So this is the graph. So here on the left, you can see what is the federal minimum wage over the time. And we're going to exploit this federal huge minimum wage increase during the financial crisis, where the federal minimum wage went from $5 per hour to $7 per hour. And so this, on the right, we can see the states that were actually affected by this federal minimum wage increase, that are basically all the states that in 2006 the minimum wage rate was lower than the federal minimum wage. So all these states have been actually affected by this federal minimum wage increase. So we compare establishments located in these states with establishments located in states that are not affected by this federal minimum wage increase. And this is the equation that we estimate, where bound is an indicator variable equals to 1 if the establishment is located in a state bound to the federal minimum wage. Post is an indicator variable equal to 1 after 2007, and we keep the same fixed effects that we were using in the previous specification. So I would prefer to show you what is going on graphically. We find that states that are exposed to this federal minimum wage policy actually see a reduction in their employment levels. And before, we do not find any significant difference in employment levels. So it seems that we are doing a nice job in identifying the effect of this federal minimum wage increase on employment. So you can see that in a period of financial constraints, corporations actually decrease their employment level. That is quite different from what we see in normal economic time. So still, we want to show that this effect is driven by corporations that are financially constrained. And to do so, this setting allows us to use this exogenous measure of financial constraints based on ex-ante variation in long-term debt maturity. So the idea is the following. There is the crisis. Corporations have debt that is going to mature in the next years. So there are some firms which debt mature in 2012, in 2010, and there are firms which debt mature exactly during the crisis, so in 2007, 2008, 2009. But as in 2006, corporations did not know that they were going to have a crisis, and therefore they did not have the opportunity to adjust their structure. So at the beginning of the financial crisis, we are in a situation in which some firms are unconstrained because they have their debt maturing exactly during the crisis, and some firms are not constrained. And this is the corporate debt maturity of corporation in our sample. You can see that there are many firms that have debt maturing in the next 2 years, that is during the crisis, and many firms that have debt maturing after the crisis. So what we find is that corporations that are constrained using this exogenous measure are the ones that actually reduce their employment level. And in particular, one standard deviation change in the financial friction measure leads to a further 0.4 decrease in employment compared to the average value of the establishment outcome variable. So you can see that even we can kind of establish a causal relationship between difficulty in accessing external resources and employment after a minimum wage increase. And it is really important. So in the last part of the paper, we use this estimation to show what are the aggregate employment implications of financial constraints after a minimum wage increase. And it is more or less what we expect to see. So the blue line is a counterfactual scenario in which every firms do not face any level of financial constraints, while the red line is actually what we observe in the data. So you can see that the employment level in absence of financial constraints will have been much higher. That is the average value at the establishment level. So according to our estimation, the total gains in treated states in absence of financial constraints after the federal minimum wage raise would be 1.4%. That is actually a really important number, considering that not all the states were exposed to federal minimum wage policies. And the effect is even stronger if we reweight, so we give to each establishment a weight in such as to make our establishment that is only based on public corporations, if we reweight to make it more representative of the whole US economy. And in that case, we find a 2% change in employment under the counterfactual scenario. So actually, we really uncover important aggregate effects of corporate financial constraints after minimum wage changes. So let me conclude the talk here. So basically, there is this huge literature in economics. Even after 100 years of research, it is still not clear whether minimum wage policies affect employment. And we actually contribute to this huge literature by showing that corporate financial constraints play a crucial role in this setting. And we kind of believe that our results can reconcile previous mixed evidence in this literature. Our findings provide a better understanding of how minimum wage policies affect corporate. Also, at the firm level, our findings provide a better understanding of how minimum wage policies affect corporate financial and economic performance. We show that these minimum wage policies really put pressure on firms' internal resources that they need to go and look for debt and trade credit. And our results, we believe, have really important policy implications. Indeed, it seems that it is not a good idea to increase minimum wage in a period of severe financial constraints, for example, during a financial crisis. So I think that it is a summary of what we do in our paper.
Okay, thank you, Stefano. Now it's the moment of our discussant, Professor Giulio Pedini from the University of IRCrES. I don't know if Giulio, do you have some slide?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations to the author for the presentation, which is very interesting and a very challenging topic, very rich paper rich of estimates and the results, very, I think, thought-provoking. And I want to show some slides about the international context. So to stress how this type of research could be usefully replicated in Europe and in other countries, and in OECD countries in particular. So this is just to contextualize this research, which is, I think, is very promising. So you see the slides?
No.
No?
No, but you can share the video.
Okay, yes, you're right. Now you see?
Yeah.
You see? Okay.
Yes.
So just to show you that within the OECD countries, 30 countries out of 38 have adopted a statutory minimum wage. So almost 80% of the OECD countries has this type of policy tool. This is just 8 countries. It has been introduced since the 90s in 11 countries. So the number of countries adopting such policies has been increasing over time. And also, we also noticed that Italy is one of the few countries that didn't adopt this policy, together with Scandinavian countries, Austria and Switzerland. This is the main indicator at international level on minimum wage that show you the ratio between the minimum wage and the median wage. So it basically show you how strong, how intensive is the level of minimum wage compared to the median wage. That is, how much is the pressure on wages and unemployment can be higher when this indicator is going up. As you can see, United States is an exception, is quite low, this ratio, because the minimum wage in the US is typically lower indeed. Therefore, the study, I think, by Stefano is much more important because it shows you that the United States is made up by 51 states, and each of them has a state minimum wage. So actually, this figure is a bit ambiguous, is not satisfactorily explaining. Then also you can show you the rate of the share of workers working at minimum wage in the OECD countries. Again, you see a low fraction of workers below this level, at this level in the US. And so you also notice how much would be important to replicate this study in countries where this share is higher, because we can expect more significant and substantial results if one replicates this study in other countries, such as in European countries, for instance in Germany. And then I also show you how in Europe it is similar, the sectoral heterogeneity and the professional heterogeneity across workers and firms, to show you that indeed the exercise carried out by Stefano can also be replicated when he analyzes the heterogeneity, the sector heterogeneity. So again, each sector hosts and employs a different fraction of workers at minimum wage, and so the results can be highly heterogeneous also in Europe among different firms and sectors. So this is just to present some descriptives, just to show you how is important, in my opinion, to replicate this study in other countries. Then about the paper, if you want to intervene, Stefano, if you want to.
No, I just have a comment. No, thank you very much for showing me some statistics about minimum wages across countries, right? Because I have one paper on minimum wage and I focused on the US, so I learned a lot from your graphs. But I have one point. So you are showing the statistics as in 2022. What I would like to say is just that 20 years ago, it was the numbers that you showed were a bit different in the sense that there were much more individuals exposed to these policies in the 1990s. So, well, I mean, just it would be interesting to see the dynamics also in other countries. I saw that Mexico have 70% of minimum wage workers. That is quite impressive, right? Yeah, just making a point. Yes. By the way, thank you for.
It's important also to take into account the temporary evolution over time of these indicators. And about the paper, I just congratulate with the author, and I have some maybe suggestions or comments. Is possibly the measure, an alternative measure you can use, alternatively to the minimum wage adoption, is the bite. So you know the fraction of workers for each county or state, if you have the information, that is affected, that are below the threshold before the wage go up, the minimum wage go up. So before the adoption before the rise of the minimum wage, there were a fraction of workers below this level. So to understand how much in the state or in the county, how much workers actually can be affected by the measure. So this is a common measure in this literature. It has been also used by a recent paper on Germany. I don't know if you know, in the Journal of Labor Economics. So it can be an alternative measure to assess also the potential effect from the supply side. Because of course, the higher is this measure, is the bite, the higher is the potential effect on the labor market, also in the both on employment and on wages. Of course, in opposite way. So the lower the bite, the higher can be the effect on the wage, because there is a high supply side effect, so the increase of the labor force. The lower the higher the bite, the higher could be the effect. The higher the bite, the higher could be the effect on wages of the employees. So the wage can increase if the bite is higher, right? The employment can increase if the bite is lower. So it depends on so this measure, I think, could be really important to if it's possible to take into account. Then another issue could be the use of long-term debt in the the second part of the analysis, which I think could be also a measure of financial constraint. But now I wonder whether you don't use the same measure in the two parts. So why don't you use the financial constraint measure that you use the first part also in the second part? So to be also more homogeneous in the analysis. So, and then also about the results, I think there could be two potential comments also, and potentially also additional analysis, further research in the future maybe you can carry out. One is on the composition of financial constrained firms, because within financial constrained firms you can have financial distressed firms. So firms can go to fail, can go bankruptcy so they are like zombie firms probably. So for that firms, for these firms, probably the policy implication could be different compared to another side of the moon of financial constrained firms, that is the financial rationing firms, so the firms that suffer from credit rationing. So if you are credit rationed, you should be supported in a way, also from policies. if you are distressed, you are failing basically, and so you cannot bear the burden of the minimum wage because you are going bankruptcy. The policymaker could be less could be tough and say, okay, if you can not cope with the minimum wage because you are a firm that is distressed, that is in crisis. So this is the potential difference, the potential further research, and then finally, just another issue is the potential use of you can also exploit the balance sheet information on labor cost. So if you have the information on labor cost, you can also try to assess how much is the labor cost per employee per firm, and maybe also weighted by establishment to account for the different costs of different gross wage that the firm paid to its employees. Thank you very much. Anyway,
So thank you very much. Can you hear me? Right? Yeah. Thank you very much, Giulio, for all these useful comments, and it is really useful to see what people think about the paper, and you for sure read it carefully. So yeah, just a fast reply. Yes, it will be really useful to show whether, as an interaction term, you can show that the effects are stronger in industries or states where there is higher fraction of minimum wage workers. We do something like that in the paper, in the sense that we split the sample in between industry heavily exposed to minimum wage policies like restaurants and so on, with the ones that are not heavily exposed, and we find that the effect is extremely strong in the other sample. But still, you are right that having information on the exact share of minimum wage workers in each state and industry, it would be even better. Yes. Honestly, I found some problem in finding the data, but we could put more effort. So that is, just wanted to reply to that point, and we can talk more. But thank you very much for all these nice comments and for reading the paper really carefully. So thank you a lot.
Thanks to you for the very nice and interesting presentation.
Thanks to both of you for your presentation, for your comments. Now we have again a bit of time for some questions from the audience. So if there is someone that want to make a question or to make a comment, this is the moment, the right moment. Meanwhile, I have just a comment for a general comment. Have you this approach that you Stefano present in your paper? It's really interesting because usually for researchers that study the effect of a wage change on the labor market, the idea is just to consider the supply side, the demand side, so the companies, the corporate side, just as a whole. Instead, you in your paper you analyze from the inside the demand of labor, and consider idea of financial constraint to justify the demand of the labor demand. However, what I was wondering, but probably is a bias of my side of research, is if you ever think about the possibility to analyze how wage policies induce the companies to change the use of their resources, and to split to move some resources from the labor side to I don't know technical side to enlarge capacity production capacity from another side of the complex.
Yes, so actually there are some, I mean, I have one result in the paper that just shows that firms that are exposed to these minimum wage policies also reduce their capital expenditures. And so we are talking about whether for corporations they stop to fire employees and they maybe increase capital expenditure because capital become cheaper relative to employees. So what we find in our paper is that this exposure to minimum wage policies actually reduce capital expenditures, and it is possible that employment and capital expenditures are actually complementary to each other. So maybe if capital expenditure decrease, also employment decrease. But yes, I think that that is interesting angle in the sense that, and also the interplay with financial constraints can be important. In our specific setting, we find that the capital expenditure decrease and also employment decrease. So it seems that they are complementary in our sample of public firms. But it is worth to think more in that direction. Yes, definitely. Thank you. Thank you. This is, yeah.
Okay.
Mario?
Dick?
How are you?
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the paper, for the presentation, which is quite appealing and interesting for all those who are working on the labor market as me for some years. And I was wondering one thing, because the topic of the paper is quite interesting and reasonable, what you showed about the fact that as long as financial constraints increased, it comes more difficult to face with minimum wages. Of course, I think it's quite consequent the fact that firms with strictness, efficiency in financial terms should respond to minimum wage with unemployment. But one thing I was thinking about that, because it could depend also from differences in labor productivity of workers. I think, I don't know, I was asking, since my mind goes to my age is not so so one very important point, a very important paper for me was the Kruger paper, where they say that minimum wage can lead to more employment.
Yeah.
With all those paper authors that discussed that, but it was a very important paper in showing how more minimum wages can lead to more productivity and more efficiency. So efficiency wages theory and so on. So in this relation that you find between financial constraints and minimum wages, on the middle, there is the changing level of productivity that can change the basic relation or not.
Yeah. So let me split your comments in two parts, right? First, you may think that it is normal to think that the financially constrained firms are more likely to fire employees because they don't have the financial resources. But you will be surprised by the fact that many of my colleagues will think, when I presented this paper the first times, they were saying, that is something that it does not make sense because financial constraints, you use external capital only to finance capital expenditures. You don't use external capital to finance an increase in the minimum wage. So they were not really convinced about my hypothesis. But the truth is that financially constrained firms really want to preserve their liquidity, and that's why they prefer to fire employees. By the way, so it is true, but not so clear to many people that financially constrained firms are really going to fire employees. By the way, that is just one small point. But the second point, so your second point, I think that you are raising a really interesting point, in the sense that, okay, we find that financially constrained firms decrease their employment level, but what they are, so now we're working on a revision for an important journal, and they want us to stress more your point. In particular, what we find in the paper, if we really go into detail, is that financially constrained firms reduce their employment level, but the ones that are unconstrained during normal economic time, they actually increase their employment. And we use this specific setting to show that how is it possible that minimum wage policies led to an increase in employment for these firms, and we link these specific results to all the theories, I mean, for example, the efficiency wage theory, right? Or job search models, in particular. You know, what we show in the revised version, it is still not out, but basically what we are showing is that unconstrained firms actually increase employment when there are a lot of potential minimum wage workers in a specific area that increase their labor supply, and also in areas in which it is particularly difficult to retain employees, because there is higher labor turnover, it's more difficult to retain them, and so on. So we kind of link this set of results to all the previous theory. And it is also why we do not find, on average, any effect of minimum wage policies on employment. So I think that, I mean, a better understanding of why unconstrained firms increase employment, why unconstrained firms decrease employment, what happens during period of financial constraints. I think that overall our paper kind of reconcile all these different arguments in the economics literature, and yeah, so better understanding of what you are saying, it is important, and I think it is making our paper better for the revised version. Yes, that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Other question from the audience? Come on, don't be shy. Okay. We have no more questions, so I think that we can close our seminar. I want to thank you again, Stefano, for his presentation, for his paper, and I want also to thank Giulio for to be such a good discussant. I want again to say that I'm sorry for the initial technical problem, and I thank all of you for your participation. Stefano from the audience are asking if you can share the slide that you of your presentation,
Sure,
as you prefer. Okay.
Yeah, you can. Thank you to Lucio, thank you to Giulio, to everybody, to Mario, and everybody that is connected. You can add me on LinkedIn. I don't know. You can stay in touch with me, and thank you a lot. Yeah, we had some fun, and it is good to know new people. So thank you a lot to everybody. Yeah.
Thanks also from my side. Thank you very much to Stefano, Lucio, and Mario. Also, Mario, I already met in Bologna some years ago.
Yeah.
Because I still live in Bologna.
Yeah.
So I meet usually Giovanni and Riccardo. And,
say hello to everybody. Please.
Okay, thank you to all of you, and
Thank you very much.
see you at the next seminar of our institute, and that's all. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao, grazie.
Bye-bye.